This program is made possible with the support of the Indiana Broadcasters Association, the Indiana State Bar Association, and the Indiana Coalition for Open Government. Live from Indianapolis, Indiana, the U.S. Senate debate, sponsored by the Indiana Debate Commission.
Good evening, and welcome to the 2024 Senate debate organized by the independent, nonpartisan Indiana Debate Commission. We're live at Circle City Broadcasting Studios in Indianapolis, and in just a moment, you'll hear from two of the candidates on the ballot this fall. My name is Laura Merrifield Wilson, and I'm your debate moderator for this evening. I'm an associate professor of political science at the University of Indianapolis and a member of the Indiana Debate Commission. Now we'll meet the candidates. Their lectern positions and question order were chosen by a drawing. The first candidate is Democrat Valerie McCray. The second candidate is Libertarian Andrew Horning. Republican Jim Banks was invited to join us this evening, but declined the invitation to participate in tonight's event. The Debate Commission has selected tonight's questions from ideas submitted from Hoosiers all across the state. The topics have not been shared with the candidates in advance. The rules for our debate are simple. Candidates will have 1 minute to make an opening statement, then I'll begin the questions. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question. Candidates may request an opportunity for a 30-second rebuttal as needed by raising their hands. In the interest of time, we ask that candidates avoid a prolonged back-and-forth debate on a single topic so we can cover as many voter questions as possible. As the moderator, I have the discretion to ask a follow-up question if needed to clarify a candidate's response. Let's begin with the opening statements. We'll hear first from Ms. McCray. Ms. McCray, you have 1 minute to make an opening statement.
Well, thank you for having me. I welcome this opportunity to let people know about Valerie McCray. I'm Dr. Valerie McCray, and I was born and raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, as were my parents who worked in the factories, and I was raised in a public school system. But I managed to get my degrees from University of Michigan, my bachelor's, master's, and my PhD. With my son in tow, a little boy in tow, we managed to get those degrees done. That young man happens to be a commissioned officer in the Navy, and he is also now a chaplain candidate that I'm very proud of. I've never taken the path of least resistance. My career has been working in prisons, working with men and women, young men and women who are victims of violence or sex trafficking. And I've also worked with the military doing PTSD and brain trauma evaluations. I look forward to being the next senator for Indiana, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Horning. You have 1 minute.
A minute goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we're going to be debating a lot of issues, no doubt, tonight that we've been told are individual issues, but I'm going to suggest that they all have the same problem. Our government is, unfortunately, corrupt. Truman warned us about it. Eisenhower warned us about it. JFK warned us about it. And, in fact, our founders warned us about the inherently divisive nature of parties, and especially against having only two. So we are in an incredibly divided, angry time with a lot of problems caused by a very corrupt system owned by plutocrats that don't really care about you. So I'd like to talk about me maybe a little bit later, but I think we need to get to the problems and the solutions very quickly, because I'm going to suggest that all of the problems are because of too much government, and we need to have a whole lot less. Thanks.
Thank you, candidates. Now we go to the first question. Our first question tackles an issue that voters across the country, including here in Indiana, say is very important to them as they head to the polls, the issue of inflation. This question comes from Larry, a libertarian from Greenfield, who says the Inflation Reduction Act was supposed to help reduce inflation. However, Larry says, it is not working. If elected, what would you do to fight inflation? Our question to the candidates is this: is the Inflation Reduction Act working, and what other steps would you take to fight inflation? Ms. McCray, you have the opportunity to go first.
Well, first I'd like to challenge the writer, because inflation has gone down. And keep in mind that the Biden administration did a very good job of keeping inflation in check after what we went through with COVID. Here, inflation has went down 9.2 from 9.2 to 2%. because we have invested in the infrastructure, we've invested in a lot of jobs here in Indiana. But the main thing is that inflation is less here than around the globe. And we've managed to do that. But keep in mind that most of what we see, the kitchen table issues, are mostly about price gouging. We have too few companies that are charging more than what they need to charge for products at this point, at a time when they are making record profits. It's price gouging that's the issue.
Thank you. Mr. Horning?
Milton Friedman actually said that, you could kind of bring it down to inflation being too much money chasing too few goods. Our Fed, the Federal Reserve System, is inherently inflationary, and it has been since 1913. If you look at the value of the dollar, the purchasing value has actually gone down 95% since that time. And so really the issue of inflation is one baked into the whole Federal Reserve System, and I would oppose we end that as soon as we can. And in fact, some people have suggested if we did that, we could get rid of income tax and replace it with nothing. We'd all have a lot more money in our pockets, and we would all be able to save more. But this is also a problem that the plutocrats that are running this whole system are benefiting from it. We don't have enough time to describe how that actually works, but I think everybody can see it. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and it's by design. That's just how the Fed works, and we need to end it.
Donald Trump has proposed an additional 60% tariff on Chinese goods and a 10% tariff on all other imported goods, while evoking the possibility of raising the latter, universal tariffs, to 20%. Trump argues that taxing foreign imports would reduce the trade deficit, promote American-made products, and protect American jobs, while Kamala Harris has attacked Trump's plan as a national sales tax that could send inflation soaring and cost the average American family thousands of dollars each year. RJ, a Democrat from Noblesville, wants to know your position on tariffs and whether you would support or oppose an implementation of a 20% tariff on imported goods. Mr. Horning, it's your turn to go first.
I'm not opposed to tariffs per se as a means of taxation, but we should understand that all taxation is really a symptom of spending. And our government is spending way too much, and it's too much in debt. And so if you're looking at the facts, like right now, the number 3 expense in the federal budget is not Social Security or Medicare. That's number 1 and 2. It's the interest on our national debt. So the interest on our national debt is actually a bigger budget item than national defense. So in so much as we're spending so much on everybody else's country and on so much that doesn't really have anything to do with us. And of course, wars, the military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned us about, is a big drain on the economy. So, if we're talking about any sort of taxation, we really should first address the size and cost of our government, and it is too big. After that, the form of taxation becomes a lot less important.
Thank you. Ms. McCray?
Well, there has not been any economist that of any stature whatsoever that would support that the tariffs were necessary, and have not actually stated that it would throw us into worse conditions because of it's that those costs were going to be passed on to the consumer, which is going to cause other problems as well. So tariffs does not work. It's going to cause people to have to pay more money for every product and good, and that is goods, and that is not what we need in America.
Next, we turn to the physical environment. Brian, an independent from Granger, says, with droughts, wildfires, heat waves, and hurricanes destroying people and ecosystems, I want to know what the candidates will do to address threats related to climate change. He adds, Indiana has long been dependent on fossil fuels for energy, while other states are more aggressively pursuing energy alternatives. The question is this: what do you see as the proper balance between fossil fuels and clean energy alternatives, and what, if anything, can a U.S. Senator do to help states achieve this balance? Ms. McCray?
Our environment, especially in Indiana, of course, is under attack. The problem with Indiana, we stayed reliant on coal for way too long, so we have some catching up to do. Our electrical grid is an issue, so we have to make sure that we come up to speed. We also need transition fuel, which would be your natural gas. we'll have to rely on national gas to transition us to other forms of energy. We have wind, we have solar energy that is up and coming, that has its issues as well. We also have to reconsider nuclear energy as well, and also sort this out as far as making sure that it becomes safe, that everything is safe. There's all types of alternatives, including biofuels, and I think that as we go forward, we put our research and development into those, we can close that loop and have a good ecosystem here in Indiana and take care of our environment at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Horning?
Well, I agree that new technology, nuclear, is great stuff. But I guess we really have to take a look at the money. If you follow the money that's been involved in our environmental and green policies so far, you'll see, that like with Solyndra and other ghastly mistakes, a lot of the wrong people have been making money off of us when we've been compromising our energy situation all along. And look at what's happened to Germany when they left nuclear. So I'm all for nuclear, but I wish we had more time than just a minute to discuss the entire environmental solution, because we've been bad stewards of our economy and as well as our environment, and we need to do better in all of those cases. But you can't really look at anything related to politics without looking at the people behind it. And unfortunately, we've got an awful lot of corrupt people that are making the calls right now.
Thank you. Healthcare access and affordability is an issue many people care about, both from a personal perspective and a fiscal management perspective. More than 63 million American seniors are enrolled in Medicare. Colette, a Republican from Columbia City, asks, what reforms would you put into place concerning the Medicare program to cut costs and make sure that it runs efficiently? Mr. Horning?
Actually, the only solution that's actually been run through our own budget offices is the Cato plan, the 6.2 plan, which actually allows us to phase out the incredible problem that we have with Social Security and Medicare, and that they depend upon a rising population, which we do not have. We're actually losing population, and we need to have more young taxpayers to keep this going, and it's not happening. So really, we need to change the funding recipe for Social Security and Medicare, and really only Libertarians so far have been the ones that have been pushing solutions that don't involve raising the age of retirement and cutting benefits. And with the inflation rate what it is right now, and with more coming very soon, I think you're going to see that Social Security and Medicare are in big danger if we don't do something very fast.
Ms. McCray?
There's a way to not only support Medicare and Medicaid and make it even Medicare and Social Security and make it better. We can do so if we just make sure that our taxes are fair, make sure that our Social Security taxes are in line with what people make. If we concentrate on fairness and make sure that everyone's paying their fair share, we can fix Social Security and Medicare.
I'd like to ask a 15-second follow-up for both candidates. Could you clarify how we'd be able to fully fund these programs? Mr. Horning, I'll let you go first.
Well, I mean, no matter what we do, we have to cut spending in other regards. We're spending money on all kinds of stuff that we should not. And so our priorities have been wrong, and we need to reprioritize. But the 6.2 plan actually talks about phasing out the Social Security system for young people, allowing them to invest in private.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. McCray?
Right now we have a cap at $165,000, something like that, as far as what they pay into Social Security. If that goes up, as their income goes up, if it stays fair, we can solve a lot of the gaps, the issues with Social Security and Medicare. Just take off the cap.
Another healthcare question comes to us from Alex, a Democrat from Fort Wayne. Alex asked, what will you do at a national level to ensure that Americans and Hoosiers' right to medical privacy stays between themselves and their doctors? And what will you do to ensure that people are not going into debt because of healthcare bills? Ms. McCray?
You know, we are all one diagnosis away from being broke because of our Medicare system. One of the things that we can do is just to make sure that we are moving towards a system. I'm personally for Medicare for all. But we have to move towards a system where we take care of the things that we can take care of. Right now, the Biden administration, for example, has cut back prescription costs, which has been very advantageous. They've also dealt with that donut hole, which meant that two people they have a cap of $2,000 that they have to pay for medical insurance, medical prescriptions. These are things we're moving forward. We will protect ACA, the Affordable Care Act, but I would love to see us move forward to a healthcare system, single-payer healthcare system, and I plan to support that when I get to Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Horning?
The facts are in about socialized healthcare, and it doesn't work. I've worked in healthcare until last year my whole adult life. And worked in various aspects of it, and I've seen and fought against all of the effects that raise costs and reduce quality. And you look at how just in recent years, how much money has been coming out of big pharma into political campaigns, and it's shocking how corrupt it's all become. So it's unfortunate that I have to say this, but the best thing politicians could do in our healthcare system is let doctors do it and get politicians out of the operating room and out of healthcare expenses entirely.
Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to add to that.
Yes,
as well.
I'll allow you 30 seconds for rebuttal. Ms. McCray?
Yes, it is important that we keep our privacy private. I mean, HIPAA violations and those sort of things, they shouldn't, legislation should not be in the doctor's room. I agree with that. But I don't agree with the fact that a single-payer system would be less expensive. It would be better for the American people. And there are systems all over the globe that do work, and we can get there. We've seen it happen. Germany has it. A lot of countries have universal health care. We can do it here in the United States.
Yes, a rebuttal, Mr. Horning.
Yeah, the MAID program in Canada is a good example of how this can end, where they run out of money very quickly. You can have socialized systems that work for maybe 70 years, but that's only happened rarely. And just recently in Canada, we've seen that this vaunted system that people were touting as so good is being very destructive and destroying lives left and right, and they're using what's called medical tourism now to fix problems that could be done at home if only we would allow the free market to work.
Thank you, candidates. Many voters are concerned with the sustainability of Social Security. Experts project that Social Security is expected to run out of money in the next 15 to 20 years and struggle to find a solution. Should we cut benefits for people who've paid into the system their whole lives, raise the Social Security tax, get rid of the cap on how much income is taxed, or something else entirely? What is your solution? Mr. Horning, you'll go first.
Well, you can look up the 6.2 plan, but more broadly, other than just the specifics of that plan, we need to reprioritize what we're using government for. The fact that we are funding every other country on the planet, we're using our armies and our dollar to force other countries to do what we want when we're not taking care of our own people here at home. That's ridiculous. And you could follow the money and see why that is, but I suggest we stop that and start looking seriously at what we have been doing, what we consider important. If health care is important, we can reprioritize that over Ukraine, over Israel, over every other country on the planet, and maybe bring some of our troops back home.
Thank you. Ms. McCray?
I think I've talked about this previously. If we take off the cap, the $165,000 cap, and make sure that people pay as they go forward, we can resolve a lot of the issues with our Social Security system.
Voters submitted several questions about immigration, reflecting a wide range of viewpoints. Brenda, an independent from Beech Grove, says, I'm a first-generation Latina U.S. citizen. I've worked very hard to get to the point where I am right now. It was over 17 years ago that I came to the United States. If elected, what would you do to protect immigrants who are here seeking safety and economic opportunities? Ms. McCray, you'll go first.
The first thing I would do, the one thing I would not do, is make immigration a political pawn and keep the immigrants in this political quandary of fear and worrying about being deported and all that sort of thing. The thing about it is this, is that we have grown. Our economic structure has grown because of the immigrants, because of people that are moving here. I think that we have to support people, make sure that it's safe, make sure that we have fair and safe immigration laws. The Biden administration, they put together a bipartisan bill and they backed off of it because Trump simply wanted to make it a campaign issue. It was working. Whatever they put together was going to work. Everyone was for it, and Trump stopped that bill from being passed, and that's a shame because there are people that are waiting to be brought into the fold that are waiting to make sure that their lives are safe. Thank you.
Mr. Horning.
Well, we have to understand that we've had immigration problems since the start of our nation, and some of it's been great in the long term, but it's always been problematic in the short term. And one of the problems we've had recently is that because we've been bombing half the planet, we've made refugees out of half the planet. We've got a lot of people here that are angry, and we're paying to bring them in. So this is not the usual immigration scenario where people were merely coming here for a better life. You know, we need more people coming here for a better life because, as I already mentioned, we're losing our native population, and you know, people are not having babies like they used to. And if we want to keep Medicare and Medicaid going at, you know, and Social Security going at all, we're going to have to do something about that. So I'm not anti-immigrant at all. I'm against what we have done to make legal immigration so expensive and difficult, and make it so, you know, obviously important for people to get here on our dime because we've blown up their country.
Another perspective we received on immigration comes from Crystal from Evansville, who expressed concerns about undocumented immigrants breaking the law and receiving taxpayer-funded services. She says, "How has the influx of illegal immigrants affected your community, and when did the citizens of Indiana choose to allow people to break our laws and receive taxpayer dollars for food, shelter, etc.? Candidates, how do you respond to citizens like Crystal who raise these concerns?" Mr. Horning.
Well, I'm glad this question was broken up into two, because really states have a lot more power over immigration than we've been told. The only federal authority really is to, you know, standardize naturalization, and they've done that. We just don't follow any of those rules. And so what, you know, every state has control of its borders. In fact, Indiana's Constitution specifies that it has all the powers of the sovereign state. So, you know, the fact that we have been allowing this from the state level is constitutional ignorance. The fact that we have allowed, you know, the invasion that some people call it across the southern borders is because they haven't read their own constitutions. So we have a lot more power at the state level than we've been led to believe, and it's a shame that we're not using that power. And the fact that, you know, we have so many criminals here that we've let go in a catch and release program, that's our fault as well. We should expect everybody obeys the law, and we should expect that, you know, we shouldn't be giving special deals for special people, especially criminals.
Ms. McCray.
I think that when we keep having this conversation as if immigrants are criminals, we are vilifying people that are just trying to find a better life. And that's not fair. People want to stay in the countries they belong to, that they grew up in. But unfortunately, the circumstances where they live makes it emergent that they come to somewhere else to be safe. I understand that. That's where we are a country of immigrants. And to now sort of come in and shut the door behind you, that is not fair. It doesn't make sense. The fact of the matter is people come here to get a better life. We can help. There is not a zero-sum game here. Just because immigrants may get a little help here doesn't mean that their money's coming somewhere else. And a lot of this is just pure myth anyway. They are not getting free homes, free this and free that. That's just not true. It's just made to pit people against each other.
While states are primarily responsible for education policy, many voters wanted to know what Congress can do to strengthen our education system. Former teacher Denise from Wingate asks, as a member of Congress, how could you help ensure that all children receive the excellent education they deserve? Ms. McCray.
Well, for one, the best thing that's ever happened to the United States is to provide free public education. It's the hallmark of the United States. We have to continue to invest in our students, continue to invest in our schools. We need to stop the voucher systems that's draining the public school systems, because public money needs to go for public schools. We need to make sure we invest in our teachers, support our teachers, and actually expand our public school systems. What's happening here in Indiana, there's a decrease in expectations, a decrease in funding for public schools at a time when when we need to be funding them even more. And we also need to have pre-K and child care as well, because the outcomes for kids that have pre-K is very, very positive.
Thank you. Mr. Horning.
Since 1980, the Republicans have been saying they're going to get rid of the Federal Department of Education, and they've not done it, even though you can see how it's been catastrophic for both costs and quality of our public schools. So first of all, from a federal level, it's simple. I would get rid of the Department of Education. Just talking about the states and the free, I mean, since we brought up state, that's where the free education is actually supposed to come from, the state constitution. We've tied that to property tax, unfortunately, which means that poor people get poor schools, rich people get rich schools, and that's not how the Constitution is laid out in Indiana. So we're not doing the Constitution either from the federal perspective or the state perspective. And I would suggest that we look at the Constitutions, read the darn things. They're much shorter than a romance novel, and we can get better education for everybody at a much lower cost.
Thank you. Well, the state of the U.S. economy and other domestic issues are generally front of mind for most Americans, including Hoosiers. Many voters have expressed concerns about foreign conflicts, relations, and policy this year. The U.S. Senate has a significant influence over foreign policy, including the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, declare war, regulate armed forces, and approve treaties and diplomatic appointments. Members of the Senate also have the power to appropriate and allocate military funding and engage in foreign policy oversight. We turn now to questions about U.S. foreign policy, starting with the U.S. policy towards Ukraine. The U.S. has sent billions of dollars in military equipment and aid to Ukraine. If elected to Congress, would you vote to continue or cease this financial support? Mr. Horning, you go first.
Absolutely cease. I mean, if you were to look at the actual history of how we've taken down that government and how we've interfered with the history of NATO, to the fact that, you know, we promised Russia an awful lot in the negotiated collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990. So when talking with Brezhnev and all of the following presidents, we promised them things that we did to them what we did to the Native Americans. We broke all of our promises, and we've pushed NATO onto their doorstep. We took down a government, and actually even starting in new Yugoslavia. We have done nothing but cause problems everywhere we've looked since we said that Spain sunk the Maine, and they didn't do that either. So if you're looking to see what we should do, it's peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none.
Thank you. Ms. McCray.
I'm all for supporting Ukraine and whatever it takes to push back Russia's encroachment into Ukraine. That's what we have to do, because there is an effect of a tumbling effect, a domino effect, if we don't keep Russia at bay in the Ukraine. I'm also all for supporting continued support of Ukraine.
Thank you. Mr. Horning, you can have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, as far as the domino effect, we have forced Russia and China to be friends again, when that was always, post-war, one of our biggest fears. So the BRICS alliance has formed precisely because we've been using our dollar and our armies to fight everybody on the planet. We've got our armies in half the nations of the world pointed at the other half, and we're using sanctions and every other money means to destroy lives the planet over. That's one of the problems with immigration, too.
We turn next to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. A majority of Americans say that they support Israel's right to defend itself, while also expressing deep concerns about the high casualty rate and the human suffering taking place in Gaza. What steps should the U.S. do to take in resolving this conflict, and is resolution possible? Ms. McCray.
Well, first of all, as a psychologist that does PTSD evaluations, there are going to be no winners in this war. I'm all for ceasefire, making sure that the killing stops on both sides. The situation in Gaza, the situation in Palestine, Israel, it has to stop. We need to start the healing process. That's the bottom line. I do think it can be resolved, but the sooner we stop fighting, the sooner they stop bombing, the sooner we get to just a safe zone, the sooner we can start the healing process, and it will take a while. But I know for a fact that the Israeli soldiers and the Palestinians will suffer for generations to come, whether it's suicides or drug addictions or whatever. This is not working on either side. There are no winners in this. So let's stop and let's start the healing process.
Thank you. Mr. Horning.
We've been funding and arming and training both sides of just about every conflict on the planet for a long time. If people were to look back and see how Hamas started as actually encouraged by Western powers and especially Israel to fight the PLO. And our interference over there has done nothing but cause trouble. So my answer is roughly the same, but I've got to remind everybody that we are broke. The $35 trillion that people talk about as their statutory debt does not include the bond debt, the unfunded liabilities of Social Security and Medicare. If we keep doing what we're doing, where half the discretionary spending of Congress is on war, we're sunk. And I don't think people have any idea how much worse the inflation can get now that the Fed has decided to start just printing more dollars to devalue our debt.
Our next question involves the popular social media platform TikTok. Due to the U.S. government's fear that the TikTok's Chinese ownership poses a major risk to national security, TikTok could face a full U.S. shutdown in January 2025 if ByteDance doesn't sell its U.S. operations. With millions of users hooked on TikTok's short-form videos, this TikTok ban could be a game changer for digital privacy, social media, and even global tech relations. What is your position on the proposed TikTok ban in the United States? Mr. Horning?
Well, this is well, all of these things are related. If you look to see what actually prompted all the calls for doing something with TikTok, it was because a lot of people were posting anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian. What do they call these TikTok thingies? Videos, whatever. So I'm an old guy. You have to excuse me on that. The fact that we are doing everything we can to lock down communication to make it possible, more difficult for people to communicate freely, and finding more ways to control every form of media, that's scary stuff. This isn't just First Amendment. This is taking over the corporations and the very people that want to have free speech. And another example of this is the movement against Elon Musk and X. All of this is dangerous, and while I am no fan of what the CCP in China is all about, we have to be serious that this is not why we are going after TikTok.
Ms. McCray?
I actually enjoy TikTok. I'm on TikTok a lot, more than I probably should be. But I've also learned a lot of history. I've learned a lot of things that were hidden in America's history. I don't want that shut down. But there are some issues with safety and privacy, and there's information being sold. But I think that goes for a lot of the different social media platforms as well. I think we need to get a handle on that particular subject anyway, how our information is being sold around the world. And that's a bigger issue that we need to get to. But as far as TikTok, I think people enjoy it. I don't see a reason why we should stop it. It can be a great learning tool, but we have to use it effectively.
In addition to national security concerns, some members of Congress are concerned about economic competition with China. Senator Todd Young co-sponsored the CHIPS and Science Act to bolster the number of semiconductor chips manufactured in the United States. He argued that to outcompete our rivals like China, we must invest in generation technology like synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. The CHIPS and Science Act makes significant investments in these technologies with the goal of spurring American innovation, growing the economy, and bolstering national security. Anne, a politically unaffiliated engineer from Indianapolis, wants to know whether you would support the CHIPS and Science Act and what additional steps you would take to ensure the growth and competitiveness of U.S. technology industries, including those here in Indiana. Ms. McCray?
Indiana has several $1 billion being thrown into a CHIPS Act and CHIPS plant here in Indiana. So I'm really excited about that because we're bringing jobs and money to Indiana, and just building the facilities, they're using union labor. So this is a good thing. And I'm proud of Todd Young on the other side, that's a Republican that actually is backing the bill. My other opponent, however, has tried to block these bills that were bringing information, bringing money, bringing technology to Indiana. I'm glad it's still a go, and I'm glad that we're putting our efforts into this, and hopefully we can support this and make sure that Indiana grows with the global economy.
Mr. Horning?
Politicians have a phenomenally bad record of picking winners and losers, and it generally falls along the lines of friends and foes. And if we were to look to see who actually runs our government and follow campaign donations, you'll see why they do what they do, and it has nothing to do with free trade or improving the lives of American citizens. You know, what we really should be looking at is why is it that so many corporations have left the United States to find labor, cheaper source materials, cheaper everything else everywhere else. And the theory of regulation here is great, but the fact is regulators and the regulated become the same people. They start forming consortiums, they start, you know, grouping together, and what we've seen, and what I hope what I would like to eliminate is the buddy-buddy system where you have large corporations centralizing decision-making and centralizing lawmaking and centralizing treaties, such that that's what's made the United States uncompetitive. That's the only thing. If we were to do what our founders had proposed, do the Constitution as written, and cut out all the layers of... Oh, sorry, I read that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Horning. Next, we're going to discuss some of the salient social issues that seemingly divide our country. In soliciting questions for both our gubernatorial and Senate debate, we had many questions on social issues such as abortion, guns, and marijuana. We turn first to the question of abortion. Some politicians have expressed a desire to ban some forms of contraceptives, including Plan B and IUDs. Others have argued that the government should ban IFB treatments, which include and involve the creation and destruction of human embryos. What is your position on these questions? And should decisions be made by Congress, or should these decisions be left to the states? Mr. Horning?
Well, they should absolutely be left to the states. That's the only constitutional answer. And in fact, even if you're looking at something like murder, that's a state-level issue. It's not a federal issue. We've made way too many things federal, and we've made too few things state. We're supposed to have a decentralized government with more local decision-making. So just from a legal standpoint, and since I'm running for U.S. Senate, I'd say it's none of the federal government's business what we do with any of that stuff at the state level. States have to make those decisions for themselves.
Ms. McCray.
Unfortunately, here I'm totally for the individual. I trust women to make their own decisions about abortion, about their health care. I trust the doctors to be able to make decisions with those families. States do not need to be in the exam room. That's the bottom line. The fact of the matter is that we need this to be codified into our Constitution, the right to make your own decision. We can't have it state by state. It is a right to make decisions about our own body. I trust women to do that.
Yes, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, the idea of allowing individual, I'm all for that. I want individual rights in every kind of respect, but I also understand that the more you centralize things, the more trouble you get when you get the wrong guy in power. So while we like to think that, you know, we can have more control over the UN than we've got over our own nation, while we like to think we have more control over D.C. than we do over our own states, that is not the case, and that has never been the case, and it's exceptionally dangerous how we're centralizing more and more power into the UN, for example.
Thank you, Mr. Horning.
Yeah.
Several Hoosiers had questions about gun violence, gun right ownership, and responsible gun ownership in general. Are there any federal gun laws you would like to change, to add, or repeal? Ms. McCray?
I think there's no place in American society for assault rifles. I am for the Second Amendment. I'm for people owning guns. That's fine with me. But there's no place in American society where the regular citizen needs to own an assault rifle. Children are being killed, and that makes no sense. People are dying in droves. These mass murders need to stop. No other country has to deal with this craziness. It's just the United States because of this no check on gun laws. It makes no sense. We have to have sensible laws moving forward.
Mr. Horning.
I think we're really asking the wrong question here. If we're talking about reducing violence, we really should be looking at the drugs we prescribe to kids in schools. SSRIs, for example, have known side effects of, you know, suicidal and homicidal ideation. You're looking at, what, 70% of the suicides are males now, just shooting themselves. And you think about, you know, what is it that we have been doing to our society to make us so violent when that didn't used to be the case? We have increased violence in every respect. We've lost respect respect for human life, and that is a much bigger problem than the guns. Now, I did a podcast on the Second Amendment. I think we've got it all wrong. We've actually destroyed our sense of personal responsibility for our nation's violence, and because of that, we have a culture and unfortunately, not just the typical violence you see in game shows, but we also have, just on the personal level, tremendous damage that we're doing to our young boys, and they're the ones mostly responsible for the violence.
Thank you. Scott, a Republican voter from Lafayette, asked about the role of artificial intelligence. He says automated non-lethal countermeasure systems and AI-based weapons detection have demonstrated a profound ability to discourage school shootings. If you're elected to Congress, how will you address the use of artificial intelligence in promoting safety and security in the United States? Mr. Horning?
Well, I've got deep concerns. I worked in tech my whole life, and I've got deep concerns about the government having control of it, especially when you see, some of the characters involved are directly, CIA cutouts, like Palantir and others that are, backing both of our presidential candidates. So, what I see in AI is a lot of promise. What I also see is a lot of danger, and the solution that's being proposed here is really all about monitoring and pre-crime, which is something that actually Palantir bought that from the CIA and made a whole company out of the notion of analyzing people and see who's going to become a criminal. And I think that's a very dangerous road, because you think about how that could be made political by alternating, Democrats versus Republicans, Republicans versus... We've seen enough of that stuff already.
Ms. McCray.
There needs to be a reduction of guns, and there also needs to be, need to be mindful of the mental health status of individuals. For example, we know that young people are more likely to kill themselves or shoot at someone else. We also know that mental health issues they arise between age 15 to age 28 in males. We need to have a specific rules or specific laws that are looking at that group of young men and making sure there's no guns in the homes of these young men, especially if they're not monitored or if there's an extra check to make sure that they're okay. If they're in the military, we've got someone to look over this. But however, on a day-to-day basis, homes with young people with these guns, it's an issue, and we need to look at it as a mental health, public health issue.
Jamie from Lafayette asked, what are your proposals for expanding access to mental health and substance abuse treatment services? Ms. McCray?
For those of you that know me, you will know that I got into politics because of the lack of mental health supports. I wanted to make mental health a priority in Washington, D.C. And when I first started, mental health was a taboo to even talk about, and I'm very excited about the fact that now everyone is talking about it. It's a question that's everywhere we go. Now we need more people trained to actually deliver the services. We need broadband in the rural areas so that they can do telehealth, for example. There's ways that we can support everyone all over the state, but we need broadband and we need more therapists out there. We have issues to solve. The 988 number is wonderful if you use it and you've got access to it. Thank you.
Mr. Horning.
Well, kind of surprising. I don't disagree with you on some of this. It's just that making it federal, I think, is a mistake. I think that, it's far better to keep this kind of thing decentralized and more localized even, because these problems are inherently local, and we need to be more aware on the local level as opposed to expecting Washington, D.C. to fix all of our problems. Because the further away you make the decision-making process, the worse the efficiency is, and the more likely it is that we're going to be more corruption creeping into it. And you look at how much money is already in our government from the pharmaceutical industry. That's another big concern. We've got big problems with big pharma.
Marijuana is illegal in the state of Indiana, but legal in about 3/4 of U.S. states, including Michigan and Illinois. Several Indiana lawmakers have said that the state should only consider legalization if the federal government acts first to legalize cannabis. Do you suggest a change in federal or state laws? And which changes would you propose? Mr. Horning.
Well, if what we're really talking about is trying to reduce harm from harmful drugs, that's a separate separate discussion. The fact is, this is all unconstitutional. When we passed the 21st Amendment to end the first prohibition, we replaced it with nothing. Our government, neither at the federal level or the state level, ever had any authority to ban the manufacture, sale, or distribution of anything since the 21st Amendment. So, the fact that even the 18th Amendment did not prohibit the purchase and consumption of anything, people forget how this all came about under Nixon's war on drugs from all kinds of mistaken assumptions. Now, I have a farm. I'd love to grow hemp on it, but even something like a commercial product like hemp is not even viable in Indiana. We used to be a big hemp producer because of the ridiculous regulations we have on marijuana. So, I would be all for a return to the Constitution. I'm not into, illicit drugs, but if you look to see what we did with alcohol, and you make it taxed, and you make it, I ran out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Horning. Ms. McCray.
The surrounding states, a lot of the surrounding states have legalized marijuana use, which is, for Indiana, it just doesn't make sense to be surrounded by states that have it legal. We might as well go ahead and legalize it here. But I would definitely like an education component, because it's not free of all. It's not the most safe thing in the world either. But for our veterans and for people that are suffering from PTSD, and there's other cancers and those sort of things, we have to make that medication. It can be a medical effect. Make it available here in Indiana. And it just doesn't make sense to have different states doing different things, because it's just a matter of going over the border and getting what you want. So let's make it legal, but let's also educate people about the pros and cons of using marijuana.
Yes, 30 seconds, Mr. Horning.
I'm going to use my rebuttal to say thank you. I like what you said. That's all.
Thank you. We received many questions from voters about election laws and policy, including concerns about the role of money in politics. Ken, a retired CPA, musician, and songwriter from Portland, Indiana, argued that the principles of one person, one vote, and equal representation have been made a farce in the changes in campaign finance that resulted from the Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, which held that the political spending is a form of protected speech and let corporations and unions spend unlimited amounts of money in campaigns. Ken argues that the American people now see politicians as bought and sold by special interests, and he wants to know if you would support a constitutional amendment that would reduce the role of money in politics. What is your stance on Citizens United, and would you support a constitutional amendment to reduce the role of money in politics? Ms. McCray?
Absolutely. Citizens United should be repealed. Sit back, put a nail in that coffin, because we see what has happened with politics. Millions and millions of dollars are going into campaigns. And quite frankly, there are so many politicians that I also am worried that they're being bought and sold before they even get to Congress. I think that was a mistake. We need to have a cap on how much we spend on campaigns. It should be publicly funded. That would be great, so that everyone has an equal chance and equal opportunity to run for office. That would be important. It is out of hand, and it should be repealed at all costs. It is the root of a lot of the issues we're seeing, because politicians now are not paying attention to their constituents. They're paying attention more to the big corporations that are funding their campaign. So yes, get rid of Citizens United.
Mr. Horning.
Well, you're kind of singing my song about corruption, but the fact is we should be looking more deeply than this. Starting in 1886, when we granted human rights to corporations, that's what really necessitated the rise of unions and other, the more power we give to corporations, which are inherently, after all, they're government entities. They're created by government charter, regulated by government laws, and then that power that they get, that humans can't get, like immortality and special deals, special tax breaks, we can't fight against that as humans, and that's become an incredible problem. And in fact, I would like more time on this one, because this particular issue is killing us. The fact that we have allowed money to determine who our government actually is. I'm the only one who can really talk about corruption with a straight face, because I've chosen to be in a party that doesn't get any public money. We're not allowed to have primary elections. We're not allowed to have precinct committeemen. We're kept out of that whole system, and only voters can fix that by voting against the two-party system.
And I'd also like to add
30 seconds for rebuttal, please, Ms. McCray.
Yes, I also like to say that that's a choice as well. Our campaign is also not taking corporate dollars either. It's a choice that we made. We're a grassroots campaign, and we're on the same page here as far as not accepting large donations or accepting lobbyist money or those sort of things. So I'll be able to go to Washington, D.C., not straitjacketed by any type of promises I've made to corporations.
The Electoral College has grown increasingly controversial in recent years, given the difference between the Electoral College results and the national popular vote. Loretta, a Democrat from Whitting, Indiana, wants to know if you would support a constitutional amendment abolishing the Electoral College and instituting a new national popular vote for president. Mr. Horning.
I wish people would read the Constitution. If we knew that even as late as the 14th Amendment, there was a strong punishment for states that did not allow people to vote for the electors directly. We were supposed to vote for the electors who choose our president. Does anybody out there know that? But the fact that our Constitution has been so squashed and we've lost the original concept behind the Constitution, which frankly in some respects was to protect us against people who are like crazy presidential candidates who I'm not going to go any further than that. But the point is, the Electoral College was and is a very good idea if we would actually read how it was supposed to work and understand how we were supposed to be able to vote for these people.
Ms. McCray.
You know, the Electoral College has its positives, and of course it has its negatives. One of the things that we could do, and that's not written in our Constitution, is that we could get rid of the delegates win and take all the delegates. Not all states have this, so this winner takes all of the delegates for those states. That's something we can resolve. There's some states that don't have this. If we make it proportional to the delegates, proportional to the votes, we can resolve some of these issues.
Thank you. We have time for one more question before I ask you each to make your final pitch to voters. For this question, I'll ask you to respond in 60 seconds. Several Hoosier voters submitted questions about party polarization in Congress. Daniel, an independent from Georgetown, asks, how can we deal with the low approval ratings and lack of bipartisanship in Congress? While Jamie wanted to know if you can provide an example of a policy issue where you believe there's the potential for bipartisan, tripartisan agreement, and how would you work to achieve consensus and a solution? Ms. McCray, we'll hear first from you.
I think that one policy issue that we can find agreement on, or we should find agreement on, is in our school systems, making sure that it stays a public system, making sure that we support it. That's something we should, as Americans, agree on. We should also be able to agree on raising the minimum wage, because right now you cannot live on $7.25 a year, a day, an hour, I'm sorry. So we can agree on that. As a nation, we know how much it costs to live, and we should raise the minimum wage to address that. And that should be definitely bipartisan.
Mr. Horning.
Well, this is my time to say vote for me and we fix it all. You know, the one thing you would get by voting for me, for sure, is that you would be saying to the people who own and control our government, which are not the people on the ballot, by the way, right now, if you vote for me, you're saying you are done with this two-party system and you want something different. If you vote for even the best Democrats and Republicans, you are voting to sustain a system that you know is tearing us apart. It's inherently divisive. It's unconstitutional. Our founders warned us against it. Nobody likes it. So if you want to end the bipartisanship, which to me is a bad word, we really should. I wish we didn't have political parties. We were warned about that too. But really, your only shot in doing anything about this, and I'm applying for a job, I'll be the senatorial marriage counselor. I'll be the one that can stand between Democrats and Republicans, and I'm not either one of them.
Now it's time for our final question this evening. For this final question, which will act as our closing statement, each candidate has 30 seconds to respond. The question is this: Why should Hoosiers cast their votes for you to become their next U.S. Senator? Mr. Horning, you'll be answering this question. First, you have 30 seconds.
No, I'm the only one that would really give you something phenomenally different. Marble walls in Washington, D.C. would crack if a Libertarian got elected to the U.S. Senate. And I think most of you understand that. You understand why. It would be an extraordinary thing. And what it would mean is it'd have nothing to do with me. It'd have nothing to do with any of the candidates. What it would mean is that you, the voter, have decided that you have had a change of heart and mind and spirit, and you want something different. And I'm certainly something different. Look up HorningForSenate.com. You can find me on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm easy to find on Google. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. McCray, you have 30 seconds.
Hoosiers need leadership that's going to unite us, not divide us. That's what I'm committed to. People have a choice here. Do they want the choice to, do they want the opportunity to make a choice for their own lives, decide what they want for their own bodies? Do they want to make sure that we support families and daycare and making sure we have those things that make our lives work? My opponent, my main opponent, is not here today. And he's not here because he disrespects Indiana Hoosiers and will not stand in the same place and support or talk about his systems or what he's for, and I'm against that.
Thank you. Candidates, on behalf of the Indiana Debate Commission, thank you for participating in tonight's debate. The Commission's a nonprofit organization that depends on voters and volunteers, the media outlets across the state, to make these events possible. The Commission also wants to thank our sponsors, the Indiana Broadcasters Association, the Indiana State Bar Association, and the Indiana Coalition for Open Government. Finally, thanks to all of you in watching and listening, and our audience of voters for submitting your questions. Now it's time to make your choice and cast your vote in this year's election. For the Indiana Debate Commission, I'm Laura Merrifield Wilson. Good night.
I'm glad you mentioned Jim Banks. I wanted to.
This program is made possible with the support of the Indiana Broadcasters Association, the Indiana State Bar Association, and the Indiana Coalition for Open Government.